So now we have a simple Desigo setup. What I'm going to show in this short session is when you have a controller that do not conform to your standard settings. For example, in your configuration, you might to have a few services. You can extend this if you need to, but the selection to grab is used to grab which variables can be found where. And those variables, you can find it either on the COS name of it or the COS path. It's a normalized path, or you can use the native path. And for DesigoCC, this native path is the designate. Also the native name, or you can even query a specific name value from the provider. And what you probably do, or you do, is that you probably won't have IDT 012 something to specify your indoor temperature sensors in your system. So you probably have some other naming, and you probably have a few different variations of that, or maybe it's under a certain node or a certain subpath, and then the name and the ordinal of it, so you can extract that. When you do that, you have covered, let's say, 80% or 90% of your buildings, or depending on how strict you have been. But the problem is sometimes you get something that's it's totally outside of what you need, because or it's completely different, or it's 50% different, or so on. In this case, I'm going to show you it's on a controller that actually don't even support exposing indoor temperature. So I will use a heating curve part of it to just denote how you can rename the tags to be used in Crossbreed. So you can quote unquote fool the Cblocal system to that it has some other name that it really has. So what you do is that you import all the data. In this case, I've imported it from this one, and just this is a simple controller that's been put here. And then I created a view called optimizer functions, and then have dragged in all the data, and I renamed it. But first, we will have a look at the session. So the DesigoCC session is it's the same as the EWS one in the beginning, but after a while here, the filter, it points in this case to the view optimizer functions and under location. Then we have owner ID and then location ID. And it needs to add an additional wildcard, because this is a property-based system, and thus we need to catch all the properties as well. This is good when you have an object that has a heating curve, for example, x1 to x9 and y1 to y9 and so on. So you capture all those properties. You can, of course, point this into the logical view directly and try to capture it directly. Then it's really good to set an object filter and designated filter to reduce the result set. But also you can write wildcards, for example, only capture radiators that under the location, owner ID, location ID, and whatever, and then under something and the radiators, and then capture 3 levels down. So that would exclude quite much. If you have a look at the logical view here, you can see here that under here with the location ID, we then have radiators, and under that we want to capture the heating curves and the properties and outside temperature and so on. And then it's really good to reduce that using the object filter, designator filter, and the path layout filter as well in combination to reduce the result set. Okay, but now we are using a specific view, and the good thing with that is that it's isolated, so you have full control of what Cblocal can see or not see inside the DesigoCC. Then by default, this is excluded in the result set, those property names here. You can add and remove property names if you want to. If you add these ones, then it will ignore this filter and state that if it's value or percent value, we skip all other properties. It is a singular value and treat it as such. Then, since it's a bit cumbersome, because in the DesigoCC you need to go to the application view, and then you need to go and create settings, or you need to create virtual variables, and then you need to drag them over to the other view and then drag them over here. To make it a bit easier, based on the trigger, then it will create all these settings, or these are combined. This is not the setting, this is a communication timer, but these are settings, for example, temperature low, target temperature, break temperature, and so on, service. But these are how much the algorithm has been optimized away and how much energy it has optimized away. And this is the average indoor temperature that the algorithm sees it, for example. So it's a blend, so maybe settings is not perfect here, but yeah, you can do whatever you like, and you can drag them. But the thing is that when you go to details, for example in status, and then go to settings, then you go into the details mode, it will detect if there are any settings that are not that are absent here. It will create those and initialize those with a value. If you only want to have this as a background, and that is good when you don't care about the Crossbreed UI, you just want to work in the DesigoCC, which is a very good work process after a while when you're familiar with it, then just use on new location. But if you want to both when you are in details and a new location, then use this. A good thing, because on new location it may take up to the partition size, and by default that is 15 minutes before those settings are created. But this will create the settings that that you want. And here we can go into this and it has all the settings that it needs, and all the settings needs to be populated as well with the values. So if we go into optimizer functions and go into address, for example, and then you set the address here, and so on. And then it will be populated. And as you can see now, this is how the Cblocal system sees all your labels. And you can see that this is actually a heat curve. But if you enter it into the description, so the location, it will bring it in, as in this case, IDT 01 and the value. So, so this is very good if you have completely different labels on the controller, and it makes no sense to bring them into the template because they gets very messy in that case. It's actually better to do this. If you have not mounted any indoor sensors, there are relative few labels that you need to rename. If you have a meter, you probably have 10 to 12 labels that you need to do to onboard a building. If you have all the indoor temperature sensors, then you need to add them as well then. But otherwise, if you have, let's say you're selecting a service that's, let's see what this service is, that's DHC. But if you, for example, use DHC sensitive, then you don't need to have indoor sensors on locally. We can bring it into the cloud directly, or EcoGuard or Telia, or we have many sensor providers. We automatically discovers all the configured sensors for that location, and we start to bring in the data and manage those. We can even mirror those back to this system if you want to, and then you would need to rename it to COS IDT instead, and then we start mirroring those as well, on the same way as we do for example, average indoor temperature on the controller side or CompT. It's the same mechanism. So we can read and write data to and from the system. But this is the way to do it when it's too messy. By default, you probably have some form, at least a few groupings of naming schemes and so on that you can capture, and then only override which service you want, and maybe one or two parameters in order to get it onboarded.